Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. I'm Hannah Hodge with Springfield Community Gardens, a nonprofit based in Springfield, Missouri, whose vision is a community where everyone has access to healthy local food. This workshop tonight is on scaling up the farm. It's a generously supported by the 2501 grant from the USDA Office of Partnerships and Public Engagement. Our speaker tonight is Curtis Millsap of Millsap Farms, and I'll let him introduce himself further in a moment. Some housekeeping before we get started. If you have questions throughout the night, please ask as we go. There is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, so you can type your questions during the presentations. And we will stop periodically to chat with Curtis about those questions. There's also a chat feature at the bottom of your screen, and you can use this for comments, etc. That helps me keep track of the questions throughout the night, and I can bring up those questions along with the discussion that we're having. So just give us one moment. See. So Curtis is running a little bit late. We had some technical difficulties with his computer, so he will be joining us shortly. Thank you so much for everybody who submitted questions ahead of time. We really appreciate it. Once you leave this workshop, a screen will pop up with a link to a post-workshop survey. This survey is used in Springfield Community Gardens reporting to the USDA, and it also helps us provide meaningful workshops in the future. We would appreciate it if you would take a few minutes to fill out that survey after this workshop. If you would like to refer to this workshop later, it will be available on Springfield Community Gardens Agricultural Workshop playlist on our YouTube channel by the end of the week. I'll put that link as well as our website, social media, and tonight's exit survey in the chat in a moment. So we're just waiting for Curtis Millsap to get on the call. So I will be here if anybody has any questions in the meantime, while we wait for Curtis to attend the chat. I'm also going to enter in the workshop all of the links. Let me see. So as you can see, this is our website. This is the link to our YouTube playlist, in which we have lots of different workshops that we've done in the past. This is the link to our Facebook. And then there's the Instagram and Twitter. All right, so everybody should, please let me know if everybody can see that. There's also, I'm also submitting a link to the chat of Curtis's presenter evaluation for after the chat. Awesome. Okay, so just going to wait for Curtis for a moment. Again, we are, if you're just now joining us, we are having technical difficulties. All right, there he is. Hey, Curtis.
Let's see. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I just need to...
it says your host has stopped the video, my video.
Oh, no. Nope, you should be able to do your video.
Okay, let me try again.
Yay! Awesome.
Hey, look at that. There we are.
Awesome. So I've already introduced myself, and I submitted the evaluation to the chat, so everybody's familiar with how to access the chat. And again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to either raise their hand or submit into the Q&A. So awesome. I'll stop my video and leave it to you.
All right. Well, let me pull up my share my screen here. And let's see here. We'll get there.
So just to confirm, did you just have to restart your computer?
I did. So it closed out my PowerPoint. That's what I didn't
Oh,
didn't think that one through. But yeah, that's what did it. The restarting the computer seemed to fix the problem. Don't know why we had a problem in the first place, but that's what fixed it. Now, are you able to see my presentation yet?
yep. Yeah,
Okay.
you can see
All right.
everything.
Here we go. Let's I've got to move my little, got to move the box. Okay, there we go. Can we see the title page, Vegetable Farming and Scaling Up on Millsap Farms?
Yep, it looks great. And there's no,
Okay,
it's in
super.
full theater view. So it looks great.
Good, good, good. That's what we're after. Okay, so well, thank you for joining us tonight. And what we're going to talk about is steps and missteps in growing the farm. And you know, we've been farming now for 15 years, and we have farmed smaller than we are now, and we've farmed a lot bigger than we are now. And so we'll talk through that path, and then hopefully we'll give you some insight into crops, techniques, tools, as I say, that'll help you achieve the scale that you want. And let me just give the preface here of saying that when I think about scaling up, I generally what I think people mean by that is more about finding the right size. You know, how do we be profitable enough? How do we build the lifestyle that we want? How do we serve the market that we would like to? So for some people that may be you know, 100 acres of vegetables, and for other people it may be half an acre. So when I talk about scaling up, I hope that won't be taken as you know, how to get bigger, because that's not at all what we've done, and we'll talk about that as we go. So anyway, how did we get here? We really feel that we are called to community in the land. And what do I mean by that? Well, when Sarah and I met and then became married and then farmers later, we really did not come together around the work of farming. We came together because we love community, we love the outdoors, we love working with kids and our coworkers. We had a lot of different things that we enjoyed doing. And so I like to say all of that really was more about community than it was about necessarily growing food. We love growing food, but the work was really, I would say, a secondary aspect of this. And so we've loved doing that, but just to be clear, we didn't get into it to grow vegetables. We got into it because we love community. And we believe this. We are part of a very diverse creation. You look around us and there's, you know, it's evidence that there is so much going on, and we really love being a part of that. This is a picture of my family. This is pretty dated. So my daughters, this daughter and this daughter and this daughter, all graduating high school this year. So, but this was early on in the farm, and kind of gives you an idea of what we were doing when we were, you know, 10 years younger, and how even more than that, I guess. And in many ways, it still reflects our hearts and how we love to think about our farm and share it with people. Okay, so we bought the farm in 2007. We bought 20 acres. It was a former nursery, meaning that it was primarily used to raise vegetable plants and flowers for sale in town, potted plants, you know, mostly. And so it had this big 6,000 square foot greenhouse, which I think you can see kind of the footprint of. And then it had a large shop back here, and it had the house. And so there was a lot of infrastructure in place. There was water lines running throughout these areas. And then of course the shop building itself was very helpful and useful. And there's a little bit of farm stand up front here. And otherwise, you know, it was largely undeveloped as a farm. And so we've done a lot over the years to change that, and we'll look at how that developed. But let me point out that this was a really great skeleton. Even just having the water and electricity and a big greenhouse to start with, that was a huge boost in the right direction. So 2008, we grew about an acre. Just center area you can see right in here was where we were growing vegetables, and this actually is probably a picture from year 2. But we grew a very small amount of vegetables, but it was enough to serve a small CSA. We had the big greenhouse. We covered that right here. This is a big green, a 6,000 square feet. So it's a big space. And then we also built a smaller greenhouse right here that year. And we also raised a lot of pastured poultry. That's what these pens are out here. We did chickens and turkeys and some laying hens. When we started farming, we really we read two major sources of information, and the first one was Joel Salatin. And Joel Salatin's a great author for people who would like to farm. In fact, one of my favorite books by Joel is called "You Can Farm," and Joel's wisdom from that is, look, it's something people have been doing for centuries. You can figure this out too, and you can give it a try. And what a wonderful lifestyle it is, and all this, and it really was very compelling. I was sold, believed it, and so a big part of Joel's plan for beginning farmers is this pastured poultry thing, and he's not wrong. It's a great way to get started. It's very scalable. It is a quick way to turn your money around. Broilers and go from baby chicks to a saleable product in about 10 weeks. So there's a lot of advantages there. But we'll talk later about why we ended up getting away from some of that. But at the same time, we were doing vegetables, we were doing some meat, and so yeah, this was our first year. Now, a couple of big things we did not have. One was that we did not have a front end loader with a tractor. And we'll get around to that, explaining why that was a big deal. But we did not have a really a working tractor at that point. So so that's probably the biggest change from the next year, was when we did get a tractor, and we did a little more vegetables. We got up to about 1.5 acres, and we added just a little bit. Actually, we'd subtracted from our covered growing space. And when I talk about covered growing space, I'm talking about greenhouses and high tunnels. This tunnel right here blew away in May of our second year. Literally lifted up, and it was laying all across the driveway and scattered in pieces. And so so it was kind of the school of hard knocks right away, and learned some important lessons there. You can see we also scaled up broilers, we scaled up our turkeys. And I want to point out this number down here. This is kind of my metric for how are we doing. How many sane moments did we have per day? Well, it wasn't terrible. We had 1 or 2 sane moments a day. Things were actually were moderate. And you can also see down here, this is kind of exciting. So our second year in, we had 85,000 gross sales, and we had a net profit of 21,000. We really thought we're on track here. We're on the way. We're on to something. And so what do you do when you're onto something? Well, you scale up, right? And so how do we do that? Well, we just jumped in to the deep end, and we borrowed 7 acres of land, this land next to us here to the east, and we grew on 7 acres of land. We tried to grow on 7 acres of land. We also scaled up the broilers because those were doing so well, and we doubled the number of turkeys, and we quadrupled the number of laying hens. And in case any of this seems unwise, you're right. It's completely unwise. This is not at all the way to scale things up. You don't jump in like this, especially when what you've succeeded with so far has been 1.5 acres. You don't quadruple or almost you don't multiply by 5 your acreage and think that that's going to work out. But we were young, we were naive, and there you go. So this was a bad year, 2010. We lost a lot of chickens. We had a lot of predators. We lost a lot of carrots to the weeds. We lost a lot of all sorts of things to mostly just to the fact that we had bitten off way more than we could chew. And so we learned this the hard way this year, that this was just not what we wanted to do. But that year we thought, well, if we get rid of the livestock, maybe that will really help. So we cut back on the livestock. I should point out, 2010, we actually lost money too. Okay, so our gross sales went down a little bit. Our net profit went down almost $25,000. That was obviously the wrong direction. But we said, well, what's going on is we're just too scattered. So what if we get rid of the livestock? And so we did that. And 2011, we didn't have livestock. We still had 7 acres of vegetables. We had more covered space because I built another high tunnel. And things were better, but they still were not right. And what I mean by that is we were still making triage decisions on a regular basis about what are we going to water, what are we going to weed. I've uttered the words, let's get the brush hog out and see if there's carrots under that ragweed. And this is not how you grow good carrots, right? So there were a lot of things we learned by mistake here. And ultimately at the end of the season, I had a really life-changing experience. And that was, I was out on the tractor one night. It was about 9 o'clock at night in August, using the headlights on the tractor. I've since disabled the headlights on the tractor. So I was out there with the headlights, tilling up the dust. And I was tilling up dust because it had been dry for 3 weeks. And I really wanted to seed some fall carrots. And there was like a 20% chance of rain that night. So I was out there tilling the dust, tilling the weeds under, with a headlight, thinking I was going to get out and seed these carrots into the ground, and maybe if it rained a little bit, then I would have carrots for fall. This is not how you grow carrots. I mean, just to be really, let's make sure we all know that that is not the right way to prep carrot beds. You don't till weeds under to plant carrots. You don't till dust to plant really anything. There were a lot of things wrong with this picture, but the biggest thing was this: while I'm out there, I had, I would say, just as close to an epiphany type of moment as I've ever had. And that what happened was I was tilling along, and I really felt as though the finger of God reached out and pointed at me and said, "Hey, stupid," on the tractor. And I said, "Who, me?" Yeah, you. What do you think you're doing? And I, well, tilling up the dust to plant some carrots because it might rain. I thought maybe I'd get fall carrots, and it wasn't an audible voice, but it was just a very clear impression that said, you have 7 little girls in the house who would like a bedtime story. Is this why you got into farming? Is this what this is about? And the answer was very clear. No, that's not why I started this. That's not what I'm about. That's not what I want to be about. I want to be about loving and caring for my family, spending time with them. I chose this lifestyle in a large part because I wanted that. And here I had lost my way. And I'd lost my way because I was pursuing sort of the bigger and better. And it wasn't like some corporate greed thing. It was just, there was a little bit of ego in it. There was a lot of just feeling like I wanted to do more. I wanted it to be even bigger and more exciting. And then, of course, I also thought that there was going to be some financial remuneration in that, but both of those counts were wrong. What we were doing was just not working at all. So that was really my moment when I realized, okay, if I can't do this at the scale that I would like to be at, which is a small enough scale that I have time to spend with my family and even work alongside my family, I don't mind none of us in my family mind to work together. We like that, but tilling up the dust at 9 o'clock at night is not working together. That's something else. So I made the commitment that we were going to cut back. So the next year, 2012, we cut back to 2 acres. And actually we had intended to grow a little more than that, but we pulled all the way back to our own land. So just this land here, all these things, you see sort of cultivated spaces. And you notice as well that we've added a high tunnel here and a smaller high tunnel over here. And so, there were things we were doing development on the land at that point that was increasing our yields. But we pulled back and did these 2 acres. And it turned out that by the middle of May, when we were going to till up another acre and kind of put that in production, it was the hottest, driest May on record. And we said, this is all the water we've got. If we do more than 2 acres, we're going to be just making triage decisions with our water, which is a horrible game to play. Do I want to water the carrots or the tomatoes or the cucumbers? What I don't water is going to shrivel up and die or get bitter or get nasty. And what I do water, may make it, but only if I continue to water it for the next 3 weeks. And so it's a very frustrating position to be in. So yeah, like I note here in the notes, it's the worst drought in I don't know how many years. It was people talk about the 50s, maybe even before. But we didn't have rain from I think it was the 2nd week of May to the 1st of September. Had no significant rainfall. And we had 1 inch on the 3rd of July or the 4th of July. And it was about enough to settle the dust at that point after that much of not raining. But because we had the right amount of water because we did have our well that would serve the 2 acres pretty well, and we had a good amount of labor, and we had that we really were able to focus on the right things. So the fertility of the soil, the health of the plants, and so on. We actually had the best gross and net, well, net at least, that we'd ever had. And the gross went up from the previous year. So the previous year we'd grown 7 acres of vegetables. I think we grossed like 65,000. And the next year when we grew on 2 acres, but it did the right amount of water, right amount of everything, we were at right around 26,000 net profit and 82,000 gross. And the lesson was very clear. This isn't a size game. This isn't about grab more land, put it under production, you'll make more money. This is about management. This is about figuring out the right tools, the right approaches, the right plan, and then executing that well. And so since then, that's been our game. We have continued to do internal growth, is what I think of it as, or quality growth. And that is, we've covered a lot of space. We have focused a lot of attention on our soil. We've added other enterprises that stack well. So for example, we do pizza night, which many of you may be familiar with. We do a wood-fired pizza every year. Every Thursday from May to October. That added a lot to the bottom line, and also added the different way of using our land and our space and our resources. We cut back almost entirely from the livestock because that really didn't fit us, and instead doubled down on vegetables, not by doing more space, but by planting more intensively, working harder on the soil, those kinds of things, so that we could grow a lot more vegetables in the same amount of space we were already using. And so I mention all this because as we talk about scaling up, this is what it meant for us. So gross sales went up a little bit, net profit, stable. Those are tax numbers, so take them with a little bit of grain of salt. That there's a lot of write-offs in farming and so on. So, but we have steadily improved our financial situation for the last 9 or 10 years. And another thing I want you to notice is 2014. I made this note: excellent staff. So one of the things we realized in 2012 was that we had been operating in crisis mode really for the previous at least 2 years while we were growing on 7 acres, and really before that to some degree, because startup is crisis. Startup just kind of by its nature is that way. But somewhere along the line, you should stabilize, and it should stop being crisis, and it should start being something more sustainable. And in our case, what that meant was that when we cut back to that 2 acres, and we sort of readjusted how we were doing things along those lines, then it became much easier to hang on to good staff. Because before that, it was like it was just dealing with the emergency of the day, and then at the end of the day, your to-do list was longer than it started. And of course, nobody likes working in an environment like that. But starting in 2012, when we shrunk, it was a much more pleasant place to work. And by no coincidence at all, we at that year, Kimby, who's currently my farm manager, who's been here with us for 10 years, since 2012, came along. And I'm certain when I say that Kimby would not have come back for a second season if she had grown with us in 2011. But the fact that she got there in 2012, and we had this very different experience where things were working well and things were sane and fun because we were ticking off the to-do list every day, things like that. It was much more satisfying. And so she was excited about coming back and working with us, and has continued to do so for 10 years. And what kind of fruit does that yield? So, it's not just a matter of not having to look for more staff. It's a matter of having somebody who knows how the farm works, who understands how the marketing works, who understands how the plan should be executed. And so what that did was that freed us up to take vacation, to do the other parts of our life that we enjoyed doing, like travel, that had to be on hold for a large degree for the previous several years, because in that crisis mode, there really was never a time that it felt appropriate to walk away from the farm. So excellent staff comes about because you're starting to find the right size and scale and approach. And then that excellent staff, it sort of snowballs, because now that excellent staff knows their job, and they can do it without you having to supervise all the time, or without trying to reinvent the wheel. And then that becomes just that much more productive. And so that's where we are these days. And I'll kind of zip through these. Let's see. We have grown our acreage just a tiny bit each year. We're up to about a little less than 2.5 acres as of 2021. We managed to, like I've said, Kimby's now been with us for 10 years. You can also see we've increased our covered space. So there's 2015, there was 14,000 square feet. 2016, we had 20,000. 2000, what's this, 17, we had 20,000. Oh, there we go, 2021. We had 30,000 square feet of tunnel, 30,000 square feet under cover, 2.5 acres of vegetables, 300 CSA members. Now, let me point out that this is, when we started, we grew 1 acre of vegetables and we served 25 CSA members. So we doubled, you know, we added 150% acres, and we, oh golly, what is that? I mean, septupled? No, more than that. Whatever, we multiplied our CSA numbers by 12. That, you know, obviously space was not our limiting factor. That's what I'm getting at, okay? So when you think of scaling up, avoid the trap of thinking I need more land. I have to have more land to make this work, because that's not necessarily the case. There may come a time when that becomes your limiting factor, but for most of us in this position, that's not really the limiting factor. The limiting factor is more about techniques, tools, figuring out our proper scale, you know, figuring out what to specialize in, finding other enterprises to stack on the farm, those kinds of things. So there we are. That's 2021. 2022, you'll have to ask me about at the end of the year. We're kind of playing around this year with shrinking some things and sorting, specializing in some crops and allowing other farmers to grow some of our other crops for CSA. So, but I'm not going to comment on that very much, because it's a big puzzle that we're still trying to work out. I'm glad to talk about it in question and answers if we want to later. So this is my family again, a little bit of a dated photo, but a little bit closer to the modern era. As I said, these three here are graduating this year, so they're 18 and 19, and my youngest here, Ruben, is 9 this year. So, what were our steps to succeeding in scaling up our production? And so soil. Having a good plan, capitalizing appropriately, and then figuring out our marketing. So let's visit these one at a time here. So in terms of soil, you know, I realized a few years back that nobody in the Ozarks is going to walk onto a farm and say, wow, this soil is perfect. This is just what I needed. This is perfect growing vegetables. That's just not the kind of soils we have. You know, if you live up in Ohio or Michigan or somewhere where there's lots and lots of vegetable farms, that's part of the reason they're there, because their soils are spectacular. Ours are a little rough. So we have to build it. And the good news is, the smaller your acreage, the easier it is to build the soil. And so here's our techniques, and we'll go through them a little more in depth here. But we do a lot of mulch. We do a lot of compost. We grow quite a bit of cover crops. We really try and minimize our tillage, and we use a lot of wood chips, and I'll explain how we do that here in a second. This is an example. Let's see, will we get our controls pop up? We'll be able to show this video, I think. So we have a very fortunate situation, being sort of, I would call it para-urban, where our environment, oops, I think I messed that up. Being para-urban, we get hundreds of yards of wood chips a year. I think this video is going to be a little jerky, but you can probably get the idea. I've got a skid steer here turning yards and yards and yards of compost. And the base of most of this compost is wood chips. We have some other nitrogenous materials we can mix in, things like spent grains, coffee grounds, etc., animal manures. But the basis of our compost really is wood chips. And I mention that because that has become the basis of our soil building program. So how does that then get used and applied? Well, in our case, we use a spreader to move that material out onto the fields, and we're applying it very deeply. So here you can see a pretty good example of that. Hope I'm not drowning myself out here. I might be. This spreader is an old Massey Ferguson spreader that we use to spread compost on top of beds. And when I say spread compost on top of beds, I mean really, really deep. So we're talking about 6 to 10 inches of compost on top of a bed to refresh that bed. And we do that about every 3 years per bed. And what that has led to is incredibly deep, incredibly rich soils that we use, that we're able to grow beautiful vegetables in, and with very little weeds, or a greatly reduced weed pressure. I won't say we don't. It's not that we don't have weeds. We certainly have weeds, but it's a major difference in that we now have this very rich soil to grow in, as opposed to what we started with, which was not really supporting the volume of vegetables that we needed to be able to grow in the space that we wanted to grow it in. So just a very simple example of that. When we started on a 30-inch bed, we could put 3 rows of carrots. If we wanted to get good sized carrots, that was the maximum. We can now do 5 rows of carrots. And when we did those 3 rows of carrots, if we were doing really well, a good yield off of 3 rows of carrots on a 100-foot bed might be 200 pounds. And with the doing the 5 rows of carrots and this richer soil, we can sometimes touch 500 to 600 pounds of carrots coming out of a bed. So not only are we putting more, using that space more efficiently, we also are getting higher yields even per row foot. Let me see what's going on here. We got a little problem, a little glitch with our video. So in case that wasn't really that clear, what we had in front of the tractor was old okra stalks and chickweed, and we are using the bucket to knock those down, and then we're dumping 6 to 8 inches of compost right over the top of that. Now, it's not quite ready to plant right away. We'll tarp it, and we'll let it sit for a couple weeks, and then we'll go in and seed or transplant into this, and we'll have a beautiful crop for the summer with very minimal weeds. So it's a very effective technique. We've been really pleased with it. It's a great thing for us. And then I'll show you one more example of sort of soil building techniques. This
Curtis,
is, yeah, what are you seeing?
It's working pretty okay, but I was just wondering, what is the cost of soil that good? And also in the first video, was that steam coming off of the compost?
Right. So the cost, as in like what is the production cost of us making that compost?
What is the margin? Yeah. And do you outsource that, or is it made
No, that's all done in-house. So
wow.
The answer is it's a bit of a mystery. We trade as far as the processing part of it and the machinery part, we trade vegetables for 10 days of skid steer time per quarter. So 40 days a year. And that's great because we don't have to maintain the machine. We don't have to own it. We don't have to pay taxes on it. We just have to give them vegetables. And it's a pretty significant investment. We do vegetables, fruit, flowers. I mean, we give them a really full share. So it's about $1,000 a quarter that they're getting in value, but we don't have to own the machine. We don't have to mess with it. And the wood chips are brought to us, so there's no transportation cost there on our end. We do use a dump trailer and a truck to haul nitrogenous material to us, so spent grains, coffee grounds, those kinds of things. So if I were to try and kind of guesstimate what we spend on making compost a year, I would put it in the realm of about $6,000 to $8,000 a year that we're spending to make compost. Which for the kind of yields that we're getting out of our acreage seems like a very reasonable investment. It cuts our weeding way down. So right there, we're saving a lot of time and materials. We're getting much higher yields out of the beds. And of course, I also suspect that over time, we will back off of this. Well, even now, we're starting to back off a little bit of the composting approach and applying a little less, because 6 to 8 inches every 3 years, that's a lot of compost.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's necessary. But initially, it really was, if we wanted to have these benefits, of no weeds, lots of deep tilth, and now we're starting to get to the point, where we really have pretty stable, deep, rich soil. But that said, we also bought 5 acres next to us, and so now we're kind of turning some beds and creating beds over there. So we're using a lot of compost there as well. And the goal of that is not to grow more vegetables particularly, or at least not to grow it on more land, but to allow us to do more cover cropping. Because one thing we do see a big advantage in cover cropping, mostly for weed control, more than fertility in our case, but also the ability to sustainably avoid using fertilizers. And we use organic fertilizers, but they're still expensive and they're still a hassle. And so if we can move from that into a more farm-based fertility system, which would include a lot of cover crops, and that'll be good for us. So that's the answer. That's sort of.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Let's see here. And, so when we first started, seeing an armload of beets like this would have just been unimaginable. We didn't have any sort of soil that would have produced that. And not only that, but to be able to put them, 4 to 5 rows per bed and have this kind of a canopy cover that you can see behind Ruben here, so that we are occluding weeds. We're keeping the soil biology cranking along by giving it a canopy. There's just so many benefits of this less tillage, more organic matter approach. And ultimately it all leads to more produce, better produce, and frankly, better lifestyle for the farmer. And I just want to reiterate again, it's not, this growth was not grabbing more space and using it for farming. It was getting better at using the space we have. Okay, so, all that to say, you have to have a plan to accomplish these things, right? And in our case, when I talk about planning, most of what I'm talking about is crop plan. So let's look at this, and let's see if we're stalled out here for a moment. Let's see. Okay, so if we're going to plan, I mean, if our goal is to create a profitable and productive farm, then the first thing we're going to look at is say, what crops do we think probably make money on our farm? And of course, there's other things we're going to consider, but this is a good one. This is important. If we don't have enough money at the end of the year, we're not going to be in business next year. So this is a good place to start. Okay, so we were talking about how we're going to choose which crops we grow. Well, the first thing to look at is profitability, because ultimately we want to make sure that at the end of the year we have enough money in the bank. So I'm not the best record keeper. In fact, I'm a pretty poor record keeper overall. And so I realized a few years back, after trying to get better at this and really trying to accomplish more record keeping, that I was probably better off following the lead of others. Lots of people have done good work on profitability. And these top 4 here, tomatoes, cucumbers, summer squash, lettuce, and greens, these are all crops that are pretty widely recognized as being very profitable on a small scale. And the reasons for that are myriad, but essentially, it's your labor and return on investment. Because on almost any farm, the largest investment in certainly on vegetable farms, I mean, is in labor. So, when you pick a tomato, you're picking $1.50 worth of tomato. You pick cucumbers, you're picking $1.50 of a cucumber. And then so the standard, it becomes, can you pick $100 of product an hour? And if you can do that, then that crop is likely a winner. I don't think anyone can pick $100 an hour worth of okra. Maybe they can, but can they keep it up? That's a good question too. Green beans, they're suspected losers because at the time that I wrote this list, it was more about the pricing. And broccoli was kind of in the same category, and that was because we were not charging enough for our broccoli or green beans. So there's several ways to address this, right? One is obviously you can just focus on things you know make money. Secondly, you could, and we have in some cases, raised our prices drastically. So broccoli and green beans are that way. And we said, well, you know, broccoli's a really high demand crop. We don't want to stop growing it. And it's a relatively easy crop to grow. It just takes a lot of space. And on a space, on a 2-acre farm, is that where we want to spend our space? Well, no, but if we can get the dollar amount we need for those heads of broccoli, then it makes more sense. And green beans are really the same way, where green beans are not a loser. They just need to be, we just need to make sure that we are getting the price for them that we need to justify the effort in picking. And then okra, that's a different one. We have not yet figured out, I don't think anybody's willing to pay us enough to make okra make a lot of money sense. So, but that's how we started sorting it. So we kind of went through and said, okay, these are the things we think win. These are the things we think don't. And let's make sure that we are aiming at the right things. And so we cut back quite a bit on what we were producing. I think when we first started, well, we kind of grown how many varieties we were growing a year. And so when we first started doing this deep planning, we said, wow, we're growing like, I think it was at the time, 45 different types of vegetables, and then something like 200 varieties within that. Well, that's fun and exciting and all that, but it's not a good way to kind of avoid burnout or to necessarily even serve your market well. So we cut back a lot on that, and we focused in on these more profitable things. And then we also found ways for the others to be profitable. So broccoli and green beans are still a pretty good size portion of our growing space, but we just have figured out that we have to charge a lot more for them than we were if we want to keep growing them. And then this is another interesting aspect of it. So there are people who really specialize, and I think that's really neat. It has never really been us. We kind of enjoy being generalists, and we've done that largely based on our personal preference. We enjoy growing a wide variety of crops. We still have to be disciplined about how wide a variety, but we think that that's a reasonable thing for us to do. The other thing I'd like to consider is, what's your unfair advantage? So in our case, one example of an unfair advantage we have, and so unfair advantage, I should just clarify, that's actually a Joel Salatin saying, but I think it came from the context of somebody saying, well, that's not fair. In his case, your dad sold you the farm, or gave you the farm. Well, sure, that's Joel's unfair advantage. He asked, and your responsibility with your unfair advantage is to leverage it for all it's worth and make the most of it. My unfair advantage is that I get hundreds of loads of wood chips a year delivered to my farm. I have friends who live out in the woods who have to pay $300 to get a dump truck load of wood chips delivered to their house. And I'm sitting in a very special circumstance where people are willing to bring me chips just to get rid of them. So I can build my soils in that way. So then that should guide what I grow. I'm going to grow things that thrive in deep, loose soil, carrots and beets and things like that are really going to do well. And then, of course, you really absolutely have to take into account your markets. Anything that's being grown without a marketing plan is really just destined for the compost pile. So you absolutely need to think about, where is this going to be sold? How am I going to sell this? How much of this can I sell? Parsley is a good example of a very profitable crop. I enjoy growing parsley. We grow it really well. I cannot sell an acre of parsley as much as I might like to. There's just not that kind of market. I can grow about one bed, 100-foot bed of parsley, and I can keep that mostly cut and sold a year. It's a perennial, not a perennial, but it is a very long-lived crop. And so I'm able to cut it all summer long and into the fall. And it's a great crop. But, my market limits how much of that I can actually grow, if that makes sense. So then, it gets down to the nuts and bolts of actually planning. And so when we initially did these deep planning sessions, they would take us a week or two even. And we wouldn't be full time, but we would spend several hours a day figuring out, what are we going to grow? How are we going to grow it? Where are we going to grow it? We would assign things to different fields. We were really working on rotations and figuring out, how are we going to move the crop families around from plot to plot. And those are all really important aspects of a plan. But here's the basic skeleton of any plan. We need to know the varieties, the amounts, the dates for starting, seeding, transplanting, the rotational plan, and then the anticipated harvest date. And of all these things, the most important thing are these two things. When are we going to harvest it, and how much are we going to have? Because these other things kind of come out of that, okay? So if we need to have tomatoes, we want to have an anticipated harvest date of the 1st of June, and we want to be able to have several hundred pounds of tomatoes at that point, then we're going to have to choose varieties that are early, that tolerate cool weather, and we're going to have to pick our starting, seeding, transplanting dates accordingly to be able, and of course we're going to have a high tunnel for that matter, and we're going to get those, that's all going to key off the harvest date and the amounts. And so that's kind of that's the skeleton. Now, what does that plan look like? Well, on our farm, it looks like a big old spreadsheet. And I'm more than happy to share this with anybody who thinks it'll be useful to them. You just send me an email and ask me to share it, and I'll send you a link. And it has all those things on it. You can see it's got the type of vegetable, the variety, how many row feet, so that's our amount. It also tells us how many plants we need for that amount of row feet based on our spacing. And it also tells us how many seeds, how many plants we need to seed to be sure that we have this many plants so that we can get our 100 row feet. Because, and this is, we've been able to reduce this over the years, but initially we really needed to give ourselves a large margin of error on how many plants we were growing, because we killed a fair bit of plants in the infancy, in the early stages. So we wanted to overplant, because the last thing you want to do is to come to your planting date and not have plants to put in the ground, or not have seeds, because then you're losing money, essentially losing potential money, and you're leaving your garden empty, which is never a good plan. This is a different kind of plan. This is a plan from 10 Hens Farm, which is Adam and Drew Montre up in Michigan. And many of the same considerations here. This is just one high tunnel. And so he was saying, if we plant carrots on the 30th of January, which is in one bed, which is a 90 square foot bed, he ran his beds across the high tunnel, which was kind of unusual. They were 30 feet wide and 30 inches wide and 30 feet long, because they ran perpendicular to the high tunnel. He was expecting to get 120 bunches of carrots out of that at $3 a bunch, $360, and he was going to use Napoli, because that's the type of carrot that matches that season. And you can see this has a lot of the same elements. So it's got, what are we growing? When are we growing it? How much of it are we growing? 90 square feet, and the variety. So there's, what I'm trying to point out here is there are a lot of different ways to go about this planning process. This was another friend who's certified organic, and he uses a great big poster board and gets it laminated, and he writes the weeks of the year over here on the left, and he writes his beds over here on the top, and then each bed gets assigned a crop, and then he notes which work needs to be done. So this M up here in the 4th week of January is manure needs to be added to these beds in this week, and then he has this G is let's see, G is, I don't actually remember what your G is. Onion. So right here he's saying, I'm going to plant the onions here, and then he's harvesting those, and then he is transplanting the next crop right here at the end of the onion harvest cycle. So the point is, plans can come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. Don't feel intimidated. You don't have to be able to use a spreadsheet for something like this to be accessible to you. It's just fine if you're a pencil and paper person, but it's not just fine not to have a plan. As my friend who's a former Marine says, a failure to plan is a plan to fail. So make a plan. Base that plan on the things you know about what you enjoy doing. Base it on what you know your market is able to purchase, or what you suspect your market can purchase. Think about where you're going to sell it. We'll get back to that in a minute. And but then ultimately that plan has to have those elements. What are you going to grow? How much of it are you going to grow? When's it going to go in the ground? And then you should anticipate, when does that mean you're going to harvest it? So now to the fun part, the toys. And I call this capitalizing appropriately. When I got started, I was very thrifty. I'm still very thrifty, but which is a nice way of saying stingy with my money. And that has served us fairly well as farmers, because frankly, there's not as much money in farming as you might hope there would be. And so it's always wise to not be spending more than necessary. But here's some guidelines that have helped us in choosing how to invest money over the years. Number one, does this tool solve an actual problem that you have, an existing problem, or did you not know you needed it until you saw the tool? If you didn't know you needed it until you saw the tool, that's a bad sign. It's not a 100% bad deal breaker, but it's certainly something to consider. If I don't know how many gadgets I've bought over the years, but we've all been guilty of this. Surely you go, wow, oh, that's great. Yeah, I need something to peel my oranges. And of course, in reality, knives and fingernails do a good job with that. But we all probably have orange peeler somewhere in our vegetable cabinet, or you mean kitchen drawers. So unfortunately, in farming, the tools are much more expensive than orange peelers, and so be really cautious about this one. Is it really a problem you were looking to solve, or is it just something that looks like fun, or something that looks like it's interesting, or maybe it looks like maybe it would work out for you? But focus on the things you need, the problems you need to solve. Second thing, will it pay back in a reasonable time frame? Our guideline is 18 months. Not everything pays back that quick, but most things should pay themselves back in either labor savings or actual increase in profitability within 18 months. And that's the case for our high tunnels. That's the case for most of the machinery I've purchased over the years. Certainly for our improvements to our wash and pack shed, all of those have paid us back that quickly. This is a funny one. Is this a purchase for 110% of your need or for 90%? I like purchasing for 90%, because generally there's not always, but oftentimes there's a big bump in price. So if you need the tractor, most of the time a tractor that's 27 horsepower might do the job for you. But if you wanted to cover all of your need, 100 or 110% of your need, then you might need a tractor that's 50 horsepower. Well, that's going to be an extra $20,000. Do you really need that? Or can you get by with the 90% rule and say, well, this tractor is going to work for me 90% of the time, and the other 10%, I'm going to find other solutions. I'm going to find a neighbor with a big tractor who can loan it to me a couple days a year. Because remember, we're only talking here, a couple days a year. Or maybe we're going to find an arrangement like we have with the skid swap vegetables for machinery use. Anyway, the point is, be careful about buying the Cadillac or the like fixes it all solution, because sometimes those are very expensive, much more expensive than the 90% solution. I like this one. Is this a tool that's flexible and has multiple uses? I don't like buying single purpose things. I want them to be able to do lots of different things. And then finally, does this tool add resiliency to your system? And by that, I mean, in a crisis or in a drought or in a time of challenge, is this tool going to make my life better, make my system better, make my farm thrive more? Or is this going to be a burden? Am I going to have a payment that I have to make now, even though it hasn't rained 6 months? I still got to make a payment on this big tractor that I owe money on, or on this piece of machinery that I can't use now because the carrots failed. So there's stuff to consider there as well. Let's see. So our top 10 favorite tools. And let me just say that, these, I recognize this is not a end all be all list on our farm, but it's a good place to start. And I thought through this list fairly carefully. First off, we are a minimum tillage farm, and we do as much work by hand as we can because we enjoy that. But a 4x4 tractor with front end loader, that's what FEL is, and a tiller is an invaluable resource to any market farmer. To be able to move materials with a tractor bucket that can move 700 to 1,000 pounds of material at a time is just, it's hard to overestimate the value of that for a person. And so, yes, absolutely, everyone should have one of those. And let me show you what my tractor looks like. So real simple little Ford 1720. I love this model. It's 27 horsepower. It's a typical 3-point tractor. I love that. I do have a small BCS. I don't have a big BCS tiller. because they cost almost as much as a 4x4 tractor, and they're very hard to get implements for. Whereas a tractor that has the standard 3-point hitch, you can buy implements almost anywhere for almost any purpose. And oftentimes you can find them used because this is just the industry standard. So this is a really great system. I don't do much tillage anymore, but when we did, having a tractor-based tiller was the thing. And even now, there's occasionally a time when I think it's appropriate to do some tillage. And boy, the tractor-based tiller is just so much easier on your body, so much easier on the machinery. It's just a much nicer system than a old walk-behind tiller or a new walk-behind tiller even. And again, with the flexibility of the 3-point hitch. So this is a flail mower that is very reasonably priced. I think I paid $300 for the flail mower. A similar device on like a walking tractor, something like a BCS, would be about $2,000. So, and I was able to do that because I could find it used. So there's a lot to be said for keeping it simple. And another thing tractors do really well, if I didn't mention it already, is move things. In this case, what we're moving is a high tunnel, and we're moving it from its summer site to its winter site. And there's a lot of reasons we do that. I don't know that I have time to get into all the details on that. If you're interested, you can ask during Q&A. But the point is that it's a pretty amazing tool that way, because I really could not do this work by hand, and there are not really good, other good solutions. Tractors are really the right answer on a farm for this type of need. So, so it opens up possibilities. It adds resilience. It pays itself off fairly quickly, even though the tractor, at the time we bought the tractor, it was the most expensive vehicle I'd ever owned. I think we paid, actually, I guess it's still the most expensive vehicle we've ever owned. Excuse me. I think we paid $8,000 for this tractor back in the day. And about 10 years, 12 years ago, 13 years ago. But it has performed admirably every year. I've paid about a little less than $1,000 a year in maintenance costs. In fact, maybe a little less than that. And so that's a really good investment. I keep threatening every year to buy a new tractor, but I really like my old tractor, and it still does the job really well. So I probably won't swap it anytime soon. An undercutter. Now there's a real simple one. This is something that we had not had for the first, I think, 8 years that we farmed, and finally saw one of these on another farm and went, wow, that's not that complicated. We could build that. And just like that, we went from digging carrots by hand to digging carrots with a tractor. And what a labor saver. I mean, this saved us probably 3 hours of labor the first time we used it. For a piece of machinery that cost us maybe $200 in iron to build. And you can see, here are these beautiful carrots that would have taken us hours and hours to fork out of the ground. And we're going to drive the length of this bed in about 45 seconds, and then be able to pull all those carrots out of the ground just by hand, shake the dirt off of them, and start washing them. So it's a remarkable tool, and it is just dead simple. It's just a steel blade welded to 2 uprights and well weighted. And my little tractor, my little 27 horsepower tractor, just barely pulls this 30-inch wide, actually 36-inch wide undercutter, but it gets the job done. In fact, it gets it done better every year, because as our soil improves, it takes less and less horsepower to pull this undercutter. So let me just put a word in here to say, as we scale up, these are the sort of changes we were making. We were going from doing things with forks to doing things with undercutters. We're going from doing things with wheelbarrows and pitchforks to doing things with tractors and front end loaders. We didn't have to increase our square footage to do that. We just had to get better at doing, do what we were doing better. And those tools really helped with that. So irrigation. Now this is an interesting one, but remember, vegetables are 90% water. So if you're not watering your vegetables enough, or you're watering them at the wrong times, or you're watering them too much, then that's an easy, or at least a low-hanging fruit in terms of ways to improve your outcomes. So this is our seedling table. We have a sprinkler set over our seedling table, and this was not a real complex fix. But for years I had been hand watering. I think the first 2 years I purely hand watered the seedling table, and I had a lot of fatalities on the seedling table, or a lot of stressed plants, because something would happen, or the sun would come out and I would be out on another task and it would hit 100 degrees in the greenhouse and things would start drying up real quickly. So now we have sprinklers, and they're on a timer. This is our original version of our timer. These are just cheap $40, $50 battery powered timers that you can pick up at a hardware store. You just set them for an interval, and you set them for an amount of time to run. But a few years back, we invested in this, and we've been very pleased. This is a much more sophisticated watering system, still pretty reasonably priced. I think the control units are about $200 a piece, and then the valves are about $30 a piece. But this allows me to set a full schedule. I can turn on one valve and then another and then another and then another. I can set how long I want to run each of those valves. I can do that on a repeating basis, or I can do it on a one-time basis. There's a lot of different ways for this system to work. But the bottom line is, either way, whether you're going with old, reliable, and simple, or a little more sophisticated, and I should point out, this is not the high end. This is the like very much lower middle end of irrigation controls. But it has, whatever you're doing, you need it to be something that you can stop spending too much mental effort on if you want to improve in other places. So getting most of the watering off your mental to-do list and putting it on a automated system is a really great way to free up mental space. These are our old manholes. You can see the valves in there. So we ran underground water all over our farm. So every field has water coming directly to it. There's very few hoses or pipes on the ground anymore. The only hoses you'll see on my farm really are from the manhole out to the sprinklers. But there are no cross paths and things. We pretty much never have hoses crossing paths. And now we've upgraded to these electronic valves, which are controlled by the digital controller. This is all just off the shelf yard sprinkler system stuff. And what that does then is that increases your opportunities. And so here you can see a bed of carrots that's germinated beautifully. It's germinated beautifully because we were able to set a timer and walk away, and these carrots got water all the time. We basically kept the bed wet the entire time they were germinating. And so that then gets you great germination, which allows you to have really dense plantings and allows you to have uniform growth. A lot of benefits that come out of that. Another system that we use a lot is the simple overhead tripod sprinklers with impact sprinklers on them. We also like wobblers. But this is another great germination system. We can set a timer on this to go several times a day. These are baby carrots that have been seeded out here in September. And so these sprinklers are just going to keep the ground wet for 10 days or so until all the carrots are up and doing good. And then we'll readjust the sprinkler schedule. But again, the key to this is taking it off my mental to-do list and just making sure we still have to check it. We still have to walk by daily and make sure the soil's wet and it's working. But just to know that the carrots are going to germinate properly is a really big gift to yourself and your sanity. And just a gratuitous picture of baby carrots. I love that visual there. So now this is one that I would say we've kind of outgrown, but we used to use plastic mulch a lot. And maybe it's not right to say we've outgrown it. Our philosophy sort of changed here. But in case you have not experienced a plastic mulch bed before, this is a really cool system. You loosen the soil deeply. You you run through with this machine, which stretches a biodegradable plastic mulch across the bed, puts a drip line underneath it. And essentially what happens here is we are doing all the weeding that these beds will need for the entire season. In addition, we're getting an early start because it stays warmer under there. And there's just a lot of benefits to plastic mulch. The downside is this: if you want to do a good job with plastic mulch, you have to till the heck out of your soil. There's just no way around it. And that's really what eventually turned us away from it. We enjoyed a lot of the benefits of plastic mulch. You can see here is an interesting benefit that's not talked about much, but the fact that we could get out in the field and plant even after major rain events because the soil underneath the plastic was still in good condition, ready to be planted into. Whereas if you were doing bare soil, a day like this would have been an impossible day to be planting. Other advantages, like we talked about, weed control. You only have these tiny little holes to control weeds in, and the plants fill those holes very quickly. So there's very little weed control to do. And then what that leads to is these beautiful beds of kale, in this case, that have just zero weeds in the bed themselves. Now there is, you can see, some weeds along the edge. So the edges of the plastic are always where the challenge comes in terms of controlling weeds. And I don't feel like we ever found a really great solution for that. But it was, it is a system that works really well. You just have to really pay attention to soil health. And I think, ultimately for us, it wasn't the right solution. But there's the alternative historically for us, which was tillage and direct planting, and with no mulch, no plastic. And then we would end up with these, you can see the weeds just surrounding these heads of lettuce. And of course, in a couple of weeks, the heads of lettuce are going to be losing the race and surrounded by all sorts of weeds. Here we're planting onions. There's several beds of onions after they've been planted. There's those same onions after they've grown for several months. And you notice here our attempt at weed control involved using clovers in the paths, and that actually was fairly effective. We still had edge problems right in these edges right here. You'd still get some weed pressure. And that's the result, right? And that's ultimately what it's about. Can we grow, quality crops with less labor and less other inputs? So then we went, well, we don't like the disposable plastic mulch. How about this? How about if we use the plastic fabric? And this is a really common solution, and it works really well for certain crops, and we still use it for some crops. This all has to be buried by hand, so it's not the edges have to be buried by hand. So it's not a machine solution, but it is a really good long-term solution. Some of this mulch can last 25 years. Mulch, I say, and I mean mulch in the general sense of something that's covering the soil. So these ground cloth fabrics could really stick around for a very long time, and so we're still using a lot of those, and those work pretty well. Something I'll mention in passing here, and we learned this pretty early on. This is an Elliott Coleman thing, and if you haven't read Elliott Coleman, he's definitely a good one to be as a beginning market farmer. He's a really great resource. Elliott Coleman wrote the first book he wrote was called The New Organic Grower, and one of the things Elliott emphasizes is spacing. Get it right, get it parallel, make your spacing even, because anything else is wasting either space or yield. You crowd your onions too close, and you're going to get small onions. They're going to yield less. You let your onions be too far apart, and you're losing potential growing space, and so you're getting less onions that way. So finding the right space to put things at, and then really being diligent about that, is worth it. So this is just a simple wooden spacing frame that we use on our farm. We still use these a lot, but this is a way to make sure that you keep your rows parallel and that you keep your spacing right. And that's the result of that. So this previous one was planting garlic, and then here we are, the garlic in the spring, and you can see the advantage of the black plastic mulch. I mean, here we have garlic that is just beautiful, very little weed pressure. We would usually, when we did garlic on black plastic, we'd usually have to walk through the field once a year, once in the spring, and do a quick weed. And a 100-foot bed of garlic would maybe take us 30 minutes to weed, and that would really be the only weeding of the season. And then this is fabric with holes burned in it as well. And we still do some of this. We have backed off of doing this because we've gotten a little better weed control, and so now we're able to do more interplanting. So, for example, if we come in and plant cucumbers like this, we'll also run a row of radishes right beside them, about a foot away, and we'll get a harvest out of those radishes before the cucumbers get to fruiting. And that's a nice way to add value to your space. But you can't do that if you're using that black plastic mulch. All right. So then, the next iteration of this for us has been deep compost additions. And here's our compost spreader doing its thing. And so I would say in many ways, our compost spreader has replaced our plastic mulch layer, because we now use that when we want to spread a mulch and cover something over so the weeds don't pop up through it. That's really our primary go-to tool. All right, moving on. Cold storage. Oh, that seems like that went the wrong. No, wash and pack line. Okay, wash and pack line. It turns out that about 50% of your time as a vegetable grower is going to be spent harvesting, washing, and packing produce. Now, harvesting, a lot of people really enjoy that. Most people don't really enjoy washing and packing. It's not the reason they got into farming. But the truth is, if you don't wash and pack it, you're never going to sell it. So a lot of time gets spent here. So it behooves us to make sure that it's efficient. So I like flow through systems. Here we got a 3-hole sink. We're dropping dirty spinach in here. Emma's moving it to the sink that I'm working in. And then it's moving from there over to the next sink, which actually is the one with the hose in it. And the water's flowing from cleanest to dirtier to dirtiest. And then it's actually draining out the bottom of the sink slowly. Flow through systems. We need systems where you can bring the dirty in at one end and can't take the clean out at the other, and they don't double back on each other. Same thing here with carrots. Baron's washing carrots. He's got a big crate of dirty carrots over here on his right, and he's washing them through this this handheld wash sprayer, and then it's going off to his left where all the clean stuff is going to be. Same system from a little different view. And one thing I'll point out here is this is actually mounted on an arm, so she's able to use both hands to wash the carrots. This was a major improvement. But then, of course, there's always room for improvement. So then we developed a power washer. And this was a tip from Dave Hamilton. David said, power washers are great for lots of things, but carrot washing is one of them. And so this has been really effective for us over the years. If we're leaving the tops on our carrots, we wash them with a power washer. Now, of course, you have to be careful. You can't hold the power washer too close to the carrots, so you'll tear pits out of the carrots. But it's not too hard to do, and it saves a lot of water and saves a lot of time. And the next iteration of carrot washing on the farm was this, a root washer, also called a barrel washer. I apologize, this video is not as clear as I'd like it to be, but if you look up root crop barrel washers on the internet, you'll come up with tons of videos and how-to videos of how to build them and so on. We built this ourselves, and we've been very pleased with it. The first day that we used it, it saved us several hours of carrot washing. And Brett says, good deal. I like that. Let's save ourselves time. Also, the thing I'll point out is Brett's wearing long gloves and an apron. I really believe in making sure people have the right gear to be comfortable and warm while they're doing work, because there's really no reason for us to suffer when we're in the pack shed or really anywhere else on the farm. Get the right gear. And if your crew doesn't have it, make sure they have it. Cold storage. If you don't have cold storage, then anything you grow is basically a giant compost pile. We got to keep it cold, got to get it clean and keep it cold. And so we've added to our cold storage 3 times now, and we're looking at adding a 4th time. It's just a really handy tool. If you don't have cold storage and you harvest a head of lettuce, you have about 2 hours to get rid of that head of lettuce before it's compost. If you clean it and chill it, get it in the cooler at 34 degrees, you now have 10 days to sell that head of lettuce. It's just a no-brainer. That's a clear win. And then while you're moving things in and out of that cooler, invest in a pallet system. You don't have to have this fancier pallet system, but just a little mini pallet there that allows you to move stacks of materials in and out of your coolers, because none of us are getting any younger, and carrying things around with your back is really not a good use of your time and resources. And that little thing right there, using a dolly, I would say has reduced our time in the farm stand by probably 10 or 20%, but just fewer trips in and out of the cooler. Seedling heat. This is kind of a sneaky and surprising one, but a few years back we built well, actually kind of renovated a seedling heat system. What you can see here, there's black lines. These are water lines that run underneath our seedlings, and they circulate hot water. And because of that, the soil in these trays stays around 60 degrees. What that means is we can run a pretty cool greenhouse, meaning like in the 40s or even the high 30s, and still have soil that is supporting vigorous plant growth. And as a result, we were able to shorten our germination to transplant time on things like tomatoes by about 3 weeks. That's a huge labor and time and resource saver. And so I really think seedling heat is one of those things that every farm, as they assess where can I capitalize, it's an important one to consider. I mean, look at those rows and rows of healthy seedlings. It also drastically reduces damp off and other fungal and bacterial diseases because you've got this constant radiant heat coming from underneath the soil. We also have a germination chamber. This is if you thought this was a glass-fronted walk-in cooler, you're right. That's what it was. And then we put a little heater. It broke, so we put a little heater in the bottom, and we maintain this at 75 degrees. And we use this for our germination chamber, and it does a really nice job of making those seedlings pop in a hurry. A seeder. I have a silly example of what we used to. This is an Earthway seeder. Nothing wrong with the Earthway. It's a great little seeder. It's $85. If you don't have a seeder, this is definitely the first place to invest. We now have a little more sophisticated seeder called the Yang. We actually have a whole bunch of different seeders, but the Yang has turned out to be our favorite. But it has a learning curve. All these tools have learning curves. I should mention that. And so, for $85, this is a pretty nice way to get started on seedlings. On a direct seeder. But nowadays, our Yang, I think a new Yang these days is running $700. So it's not a small investment, but it does save you a lot of time and seed over the long haul. If you're spraying at all, then a backpack sprayer is clearly the way to go, or even bigger. Maybe a tow behind sprayer, things like that. But anybody using a hand pump sprayer that you're carrying around on your arm knows that's not a system that encourages you to do your plant maintenance when you should. It's a system that actually kind of encourages failure, because what you're likely to do is postpone that until the problem is bad. So. And then this is the last one. This used to be how we moved everything around the farm. We had Vermont carts, garden carts, and we still have these, and they still get a little bit of use. But then this happened, and golf carts are magical. Golf carts make any distance shrink to almost nothing. It makes the ride fun. On a hot day, there's nothing more fun than hopping on a golf cart and taking a little ride. Even if the ride is to go get more tomato plants to transplant or whatever it is, it just adds a little element of fun to the day, and it's much speedier way to move materials around the farm, and it's properly sized. I've got lots of friends who use pickup trucks for that purpose, but this is a different type of vehicle. You hop on, hop off. You're just much more likely to be in touch with the land and what's going on a golf cart than you are in a truck or something like that. Oh, and doubles as a baby feeding platform. And I can't really limit it to 10. I also have a dump trailer that I love using. This is Hannah had asked about the our composting system, and this was a game changer for us on composting, because now we could go get things when it made sense. When we could pick up things like a dump trailer load of cocoa hulls, then it made sense to go do that. Before that, something like that meant putting in the back of a pickup truck or a non-dump trailer, and then a big hassle when we got back to the farm in terms of labor and effort. And then this one is one of our favorites as well. This is a greens harvester. And we used to do this on our hands and knees with knives and scissors. And then we bought this machine, and we've really never looked back. This is a marvelous machine for cutting salad greens. You can do it in less than 1/10 of the time that it would take to do it with scissors and knives. Okay. And then, okay, so the last thing, marketing. I'll just say a few things about it, but it's really its own presentation. I've got some presentations on marketing. So if that's where you are is thinking about that, then that's where you should go is take some look at some of our marketing presentations. But the basic thing you need to consider is, what do I want to do? Do I want to sell high volume and low price, or do I want to sell low volume, high price? And what comes with that usually is a personal investment. So if you're going to sell low volume, high price, you're probably going to be doing direct marketing to customers. And so you're going to need more of a sort of people personality. On the other hand, if you would rather sell, if you'd rather not socialize with people for every sale, and you'd rather sell, hundreds of dollars of stuff at a time, and you're okay with the price being a little bit lower, then these wholesale outlets are probably the right place for you. But that's really mostly personal preference more than anything else. Our favorite is community supported agriculture. Again, I'm not going to dig into that because it is its own topic, but I'll just leave it at that and say we love CSA. It's a really great system for us. It's supported our farm very well, and it's connected us to our community in ways that I don't think we ever would have been able to do in like through the farmers market or through wholesale outlets. And these are my people. These are my CSA members. These are the people who I know and care about and get to spend time with, and they really understand our operation more than anyone ever could, like at the farmers market, and they enjoy being part of our farm. And they come out on even crummy days like this to help us out. All right, so that is that's scaling up with Millsap Farm, and I'm sure we could talk for days more about how this works, but I hope that's a good outline. I hope that is helpful. And yeah, I think we have just a couple minutes for some question and answers.
That was awesome. It looks as though we don't have any attendees, but if you are watching this on YouTube, feel free to make a comment or chat, and we can direct those questions to Curtis at a later date.
Exactly so, yes. And I should mention I am very available. So if you you want to email me, you want to send me a text, my phone number is all over the internet, for better or worse. I respond really well to text, and I love sharing what we do, and I love to see other farmers succeed. So I'm glad to share information and glad to help you solve problems.
And that was awesome, Curtis. Good job. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Hannah.
Bye.